Well, good morning, or afternoon, or evening, depending on what part of the world you're in today. We want to welcome you to the Journix Project Execute webinar. Today's webinar is titled Project Document Management, How to Save Time, Reduce Workload, and Increase Productivity. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is James Bronner. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Journix, and it's certainly my pleasure to be the MC for today's presentation. We have as a guest with us today Daryl Raynor, who is a very talented project manager, many years of experience, and I'll let him do a better job of introducing himself and his background. But you're really going to enjoy today's presentation. All of us certainly want to know how to save time, reduce workload, and increase productivity. And the whole document management process is difficult, needless to say, at times. So Daryl's going to help us to understand how to do a much better job of documenting and producing the kinds of materials that are necessary for a team to succeed. Our webinar will be right under an hour, and we recognize your time is valuable, so we will keep it to that timeline. A couple of housekeeping items. You can receive a full PDU for attendance at today's webinar. What do you need to do in order to receive that? Good news is absolutely nothing. What we'll do is we'll send out a follow-up email probably within a day or two following the webinar, and attached to that will be your PDU certificate. So rest assured, just give us a couple of days, we'll get that out to you. Then finally, you're going to be able to submit questions online anytime during the presentation today. I would encourage you to click on the Questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. If it makes sense, we'll try to interject those during Daryl's presentation. If not, we'll hold those to the end. But I would encourage you to go ahead and document those while you're thinking about them. I know a lot of folks, questions come up and then you let the presentation run on and you forget what question you wanted to ask. But Daryl wants you to ask your questions, and that certainly makes the presentation much more interesting to all of the attendees. Well, our agenda is quite straightforward. First, as I mentioned, our special guest today, Daryl Raynor, is going to take us through the presentation, and then we'll begin submitting, or I should say responding to your submitted questions during the Q&A time. So, without further ado, Daryl, I'm going to hand over the reins to you.
All right. Thank you very much, James. Hope everyone can hear me. Please let me know if that's not the case by asking a question, and James will consolidate those and let me know to speak louder, speak softer, any of that. So again, welcome to the webinar, and absolutely we do want your questions. We do these for you, not us, right? And this topic, I was asked to do this by two of my clients, and this has absolutely been so much fun because it's allowed us to put in a little bit more formalized manner and very understandable some of the things we've been doing for years, and it's just really caught on. It's been a lot of fun to have this and be able to put it together in a format that's useful. There are items in here, small tactical things that anybody can do at any level of a project and derive great benefit. There are kind of mid-level strategic things that you will need the tacit permission of your team and the people working with your project together. And then there are larger strategic items for you that it would take a PMO or a directive from an executive to have happen, such as to create and maintain and deal with a virtual organization glossary, right? So there's something here for everyone. There are things you can implement this afternoon, and there are some things you'll need to think about an architect, and then there are some larger things for the more mature organizations that really want to put out to reduce their document burden, right? So a couple of things just to get started. Why are we even talking about this? Why aren't we talking about project management? Well, we are talking about project management. A lot of project management is deciding on what processes to execute to create the deliverables that you need for your project. It so happens that many of the deliverables are documents on a project, everything from status reports to requirements documents to all the flotsam and jetsam that happens during a project for project logs. So first of all, why do you even bother with controlling documents, right? Well, because you want to reduce your search and rescue time, right? If you can't find something, it's a big drag on productivity, right? Studies have shown that information workers, which we are, if you're listening to this, you're probably an information worker, not a bricklayer, right? Look for items between 20 and 45 minutes a day. You're spending a huge chunk of your day looking for stuff, right? So how frustrating is that when you're looking for something you can't find it? It's very frustrating. So it's causing stress and it's wasting time, right? You don't want to be, I know there's mixed gender here, but like that guy running a project where nobody can ever find anything. That's a horrible burden to put on people, right? And also, if people don't know where to put things, they'll put them wherever they want, right? And you want to reduce the number of documents. There are dozens to hundreds to I have seen projects with thousands of documents, right? So as a teaser, we're going to show you how to get rid of separate agenda documents in 2 ways and get rid of those horrible meeting minutes documents without losing any of the information. In fact, the information gathered during meetings is better than if you have meeting minutes, right? So the first thing is you want to think about every time a document is created, it puts more of a burden on a team. More documents, more burden, right? So those are just some of the benefits we have to talk about today, right? So what are the expectations? We call this a course because we have a course. This is just an excerpt, right? You want to know a little bit more about which and where to put your documents, right? You want to be able to influence on your project whether or not you have directive authority. You want to be able to influence the format and content. And you want to negotiate processes to construct your documents, right? And I'll let you know a secret. Processes are tasks, and documents are deliverables. So this puts in the context of project management. And you want to have a say in how to architect the way your documents are stored and managed, right? That's what we hope to communicate to you today. It can't be everything about this, but we can sure give you some areas to work on, things to do right now, takeaways, as it were, and then things to think about for the future, right? So there's some relative obvious statements that I'm going to make, and then I'll tell you why they're not quite so obvious, right? You want to format all your documents. Well, everybody already does that, right? But there's 2 things that you may not have thought of that should be front and center as you think about formatting your documents, right? First of all, to put the most important information first, right? Because everybody does not have time to read voluminous documents. So if someone picks up a document and starts to read it or looks at it online and they start at the top, you want, by definition, wherever they stop reading, from the first sentence to the last sentence, they have automatically read the most important things about that document, topics that are in that document, right? And here is a relatively theoretical suggestion. Document format does not have to remain absolutely static throughout the life of a project, right? So let me say that again. Documents don't have to maintain the same order of topics all through the project. That's another way of saying that, right? You can change the order of your document. The way you would do that in Microsoft Project, for instance, at the beginning, everything's interesting. You want to look at the whole file. At least project managers do, right? As you start, really, once you get started and you've come to a milestone in your planning, really the only interesting stuff is the stuff that's coming up pretty soon, right? in the next week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever. People aren't interested so much right now, once the project starts and is planned, in the items that come up in a year, right? You don't care right now. I just want to do work now. I only want to know what's coming up in the next week. And then what's the least interesting part of a Microsoft project file in the middle of a project? It's the stuff that's done. Nobody wants to see that. You want to see the stuff that's coming up. You want to see the tasks and deliverables that are late. You might want to plan and look at everything Billy Bob needs to do on this project that's not already completed. There's nothing more boring in a schedule when you're looking at it on a day-to-day basis than something that's already done. So in project, the way to do that is you just compress that outline, right? So you're not really looking at it. You're only looking at the summary task. You expand the section that's of interest. So you can do that with any tool that supports outlining. You basically collapse and expand at your whim what's interesting. Well, a lot of things don't have outlining, really, like Excel. So in Excel, if you're using that for your document, you simply hide the rows and columns that aren't pertinent to your discussion right now, right? So if you're using Word, I know there are complex ways to do that, but it's easier just to put the important stuff at the top. Just move it to the top. The table of contents will auto-regenerate so everybody knows where it is. So the topics you're talking about that day, that week, are at the top of the document. It just makes sense. You don't have to do that, but it's a tactic you can consider, right? Also, as you format your documents, think about how they look on the screen, not just how they look printed, because you don't want people to print your documents, right? You no longer want people to print your documents. You want to look at them on this screen. They change all the time, especially at certain points of a project. They're in flux, very dynamic, which is good. So as soon as somebody prints a document, it's probably out of date, right? And you want people to be able to read your documents online. So you have to worry about fonts and colors and all that sort of thing. So when you project it up on a big wall screen, it looks okay. When you look at it on a little bitty laptop screen, it looks okay. And now you may even need to think some people are going to use this on a tablet, which is not too different from a laptop in terms of real estate, and another mobile device that may be as small as an iPhone. So you're not going to know how it looks until you test it there if you feel people will deal with it, right? So here's another aspect of best practices is don't duplicate information. That's very easy to say, right? So here's a little thought for you. Anytime you take your mouse and you sweep it across the screen and highlight information, what are you probably going to do? You're probably going to copy that information. And then what are you probably going to do? You're probably going to paste that information. Now you have just created a network of information in your documents that may or may not be updated for the rest of the project, right? So I'm not saying don't ever duplicate information. Just make it your default to not duplicate information. Don't cut and paste stuff, refer back, right? You want to have as little overlap as humanly possible in your documents so you're sure when you're looking at some information that it hasn't morphed into 5 or 10 more places, and you'll never be able to find it all and figure out who's updating what and find out what's the one true paragraph about this topic, right? That's easier said than done. That's just a habit to get into. Links, hyperlinks now, referenceability within and across documents is very easy to do. The update or static bullet refers to an attribute of a document, whether you're going to update it for the life of the project or you're not, right? Every document should possess that attribute, update or not, update or static. And everybody should know what it is. We feel you should add that to your footer or make a watermark on the documents that are static so everybody knows point in time or the date across it was the last update date and you are not expecting to update it again, right? So that's a decision with every document, are you declaring it that you will update it throughout the rest of the project, or are you declaring it to be static and only of use for this one moment in time, like a status report, right? You don't update a status report. The one issued 3 weeks ago, you do not update one. You make a new one every week or every month or whenever, and that's the one that's updated up until the point it's accepted. Then you've never updated again, probably, unless there's some typo or something you want to correct, right? So a status report is the poster child for static documents. A requirements document, for instance, is the poster child for documents that should be updated through the life of the project. And please use a tool that automatically tracks changes to relieve everybody of that burden, right? It's very easy to use a tool like SharePoint or Google Docs or any of 100 other tools that knows who updated it, when they updated it, and with very little effort, you could add some tags like the requirement number or the defect number or the change control number that shows why you updated it. And it will know who you are, and it knows the date, and it knows what you updated, and you can do compares and rollbacks and all that. Don't make that a manual process, right? So a couple things here. Here's an acronym, and it's defined later in the presentation, don't worry. WEDIACPO. That's write everything down in a known place once. Write everything down in a known place once. So this is a little guideline that goes with this is no winging it, right? Don't wing it, which means don't just go off half-cocked. Plan what you're going to do, put it in a document, negotiate it with your key stakeholders, and move on, right? The second bullet here is it is a best practice, and this is what we do when we manage projects and we teach people to do. You want to, in a perfect world, you could create every document that you'll need for that whole project the first hour of the project. The first half day, you would create, not finish, create every single document you would need on that project. Now, people aren't perfect, so sometimes you have to add a couple, but this is a sub-part to WEDIACPO. In order to be able to write everything down in a known place once, you've got to have a known place for everything that will need to be written down on your project. So SharePoint does this great. There's other tools that do this. You want to create a place to write things down, right? The next one is use a discussion group or a wiki or something. Don't use email to record important information, to even ask important questions, right? Because it's secret. That should say don't use email or pieces of paper in your little notebook. They're secret. Nobody else can make any sense out of them, right? Ask questions in a way that is public and write the answer down in a way that's public and consumable by others. These are all very simple, common sense things that people are not doing. Right? You also have some documents that you can use as agendas and meeting minutes. I'm going to assume that you're working in some sort of office productivity suite that possesses some sort of calendaring process. iCal, Outlook, GroupWise, whatever, that there's some way you can send somebody a meeting invitation or calendar entry and they can reply yes. Okay, so the first thing, if you can't break yourself of having a separate agenda, put it in the body of the meeting announcement. Don't put it in another file that serves as an attachment that somebody has to click on, again, to get further down in the bowels of something. Don't create a hierarchy for something as simple as a meeting agenda, right? The second way you can do it, it's a little bit more advanced, is if you have embraced WEDIACPO, right? You've embraced WEDIACPO, there's a place for all information, you don't need an agenda, right? In the meeting announcement, you simply send a link to the document that already holds the information, the topics, the questions that are going to be covered in the meeting. It's not a separate document. It's where that information lives. Let me give you two quick examples. Let's say you're having a meeting to define one of the main test scenarios for your project. Test scenario, acceptance criteria, whatever. Instead of having a meeting minute file where you're just typing stream of consciousness stuff, you open up the scenario document wherever it lives, you put any questions right in there, you highlight some sections, and you say, this is what we're going to talk about today. And then as you talk about it, you take the notes, not in some other file, not on your little big cheap tablet, right in the document where it ultimately lives. So you saved an agenda, that's a file. You saved meeting minutes, that's a file. And you saved a review cycle, right? You don't have to package something up and send it around for review to the attendees because it's right in front of them right now. It's over, right? We use this all the time. It saves so much time, right? Because ask yourself, what do people do with meeting minutes? You're probably not going to like the answer. In most of my client organizations, you're probably not going to like the answer. Meeting minutes no longer work. Everybody's too busy. They don't work, right? And then we'll talk about the slider here. This is just a concept, right, for you on your projects to get together with your teams or to decree what deliverables you're going to have, what processes you're going to execute to construct those deliverables, which are tasks, and how much of every single document that you want, right? This is where you declare which documents you're going to have, what they're going to have in them, how much detail, right? You just grab that little circle and move it around until it hits the right spot for every document. Some documents you don't even need. Some documents you only need to have summary information. Some documents you need an egregious amount of detail. Every project's different. You want to declare that up front, and then the deliverables go where? Project management call, right? They go on your schedule. They go on Project Execute. They go on Microsoft Project. They go in your little Excel file where you keep your deliverables, whatever, right? A document is a deliverable on a project. It has a process to construct it and to approve it, which are a set of tasks that should be assigned to people and kept track of and variances dealt with, right? So here's just a little quick reminder that you have questions, you have notes about a project. I could have simplified this slide by just saying all the time, right? All the time. Before you talk to people, as you're analyzing, as you talk to people, as changes occur, and then really the only decision point on here is your question file or the repository for the information exchange, should that travel across turnover as you exit and tidy up the project, or should it just be archived with the project document? Right? Should it travel? It's a quick decision. So here's just some examples on projects of any size, like $5 million on up to hundreds of millions of dollars that we manage. We usually have at least 10 different kinds of project logs. Basically, a project log is just a name for a place to put the stuff you want to keep track of in a project in a formal way, right? Clearly, you need action items, issues, decisions, a glossary, risks. I mean, sometimes risk has its own log, which has a formal name, risk register, and it's a big thing. Sometimes it's just a little list, right? So it depends on the project. In a perfect world, these would all be editable by multiple people at the same time and automatically resolve. In an imperfect world, one person edits them at a time, right? In a really imperfect world, these are all captured on a whiteboard someplace. It's better than nothing. But it's one place, right? And so you want to use these. So whenever something comes up in meetings or any time, when something comes up, you have to say, okay, first of all, should we even be talking about this? Second of all, do we need to write anything down about this topic? If we do, let's find its home. Let's not take a little random note. Let's find its home. Many times, its home will be in a project log. We help clients, beef these things up and help them with the change management, which is much harder than the mechanical steps. The change management to get people to change what they're doing to get more productive is what's important, right? Okay, switching topic. I'll take a breath. If you have any questions, type them into James, and we'll address them as we need to.
So Daryl, it sounds like what you're really advocating on a big scale here is electronic over hard copy, almost predominantly, right?
Absolutely. In a perfect project, you never print anything out. Few projects are perfect.
But you know, we've been talking about moving to electronic docs for, gosh, 15 years, and you know, it's not an insurmountable task, but it sounds like it's a task that can be done if you take incremental steps and build a process like you're talking about.
You bet, right? I'm old enough to where I remember reading that COBOL would negate the need for programmers because it was written in somewhat plain English, right? So that didn't happen, right? And then fourth generation languages were going to do the same thing. That didn't happen. And then AI was going to do the same thing. That didn't happen. So I don't expect that we can get rid of all the printers, right? But I do expect when people work for me on a project, I don't want them printing out stuff unless they're going to read it standing up on a train on the way home. Or if it's so complex that they need to read it and read it and read it and take detailed notes about it, and then they'll scribe those notes back in. I do that myself sometimes, right? But the default for everyday work should be online, because if it's not online, it's secret.
I like your two little caveats that they make sense, you know, because I'll do the same thing. If it's something that's significantly deep and needs concentration, I'll print it out. Or if it's something that needs to be mobile and I don't want to read it on my small phone, then I'll print it and take it with me. So those make sense to me.
Right. And I am seeing incrementally at some of our clients, and some of the clients are like ConAgra, Dell, Temple Inland, Emerson Process Control, and then dozens of smaller concerns that a lot of people haven't heard of. There are people, when I talk to them, after we work with them, they are so proud. They'll come up and say, Daryl, I haven't printed anything for weeks except the boarding pass. They haven't printed anything for weeks, right? And I'll have to admit, I still print my boarding passes because when I travel a lot, when I stand in that line, I see still about 25% of the smartphones are not readable by those scanners at the airport. So I admit that I still print my boarding passes. But I don't print much. I don't print much, right? And when I do print it, I have a reason that I need to print it. So thanks for summarizing some of the comments and chiming in. I appreciate it. Okay, let's look at this next topic. Writing at the 6th grade level, right? So for normal business correspondence, you should be writing at the 8th grade level and below. And for requirements, you should write at the 6th grade level. For those of you that have Word, if you go into spelling and grammar, different versions, it's hidden someplace else. But there's a little checkbox that I can't remember exactly what it says, but it says something like, maybe James, you could look it up if you have time in between some of this. Says something like, enable Flesch-Kincaid reading index or something like that. Then when you highlight a block of text and hit that spell grammar check, you get an extra little piece of information at the end, if there are anything that flags, that will tell you the grade level that you're working at. I really hate to admit now that when I first started doing that, the grade level I wrote at was 24. My writing was so bad, you had to have 24 years of education to understand it. That's really bad. It really took me 5 years to get down to the 6th grade level on purpose. And the Flesch-Kincaid is not magic. It just measures the number of ideas per sentence, the number of words per sentence, whether or not the sentence is compound, and the words, the number of syllables per word, less is better, and the number of sentences in a paragraph, and a few other things. But it's very simple. It's a very simple algorithm. It does it instantaneously, right? And the gist of it that's been proven is that the longer something is, the harder it is to understand. The more ideas you pack into it, the harder it is to understand. And the harder it is to understand, the easier it is to misunderstand, right? So look at the quote. You want to move toward that, away from any one of 100 interpretations down to only one interpretation, right? And you want to think about reuse. If your writing is relatively granular, severable, maybe cut up into something as discrete as bullet points, right? That could be reused a lot easier than long paragraphs of narrative, right? And if reuse will help your efforts, then by all means, jump on that, right? Wikipedia, one of my favorite places to be skeptical of, but in this case, it has some good little definitions here, right? Opportunistic reuse is when somebody thinks, hey, I bet somebody did this, looky here. And planned is when there is a task assigned to one or more people to go out and see actually what can be reused before you start. That's the difference of planning and intent or stumbling on something. Neither one is bad, but you want to think, is it worth it to spend a little bit of time seeing if we can save time by reusing some portions of documents or just referring to them, right? You don't have to duplicate, you can refer via link. And speaking of links, for your systems, this is kind of an IT thing, but can apply in many other instances. I mean, even my weed eater at home that I do battle with regularly has online documentation. This is not an odd thing now, right? My weed eater, that's about 10 years old, has online documentation. So anything now can have online documentation, right? So the point of a document circle, and we don't have a lot of time to get deeply into it, I just want to briefly describe it, is from any place anybody would ever be who's trying to reference something that you have, I'll call it a system or a product, they should be able to get to every other piece of documentation one way or the other inside there by navigating, not exiting and looking. So let me tell you what I mean. So let's say somebody is on a screen trying to do something and they think to themselves, I don't know what I'm doing here. And they hit the help key. The help could give them some little context-sensitive bit of information and say, here's a whole bunch more details about this screen. Click here. If you click the next link, this will take you to the process description that we think you're trying to do. Right? People are using a screen to execute some sort of process, so it's not about the screen, it's about the process. Right? And also this other button would give you a different kind of context. You click it and you would be in the requirements that drove the building of this system. And if you're in the requirements and you're going, I wonder why they did this, there would be links back to the process, the business process that's trying to be executed using this piece of automation, right? When you're in the business process, you could click and bring up the help file that would help somebody in this process. So you need to be able to get to all these from anywhere. Regardless of where somebody reaches out, they should have access to everything that their security information allow them to have. Right? Don't make them jump out and go look for something in some knowledge base someplace, or jump out and paw around a folder structure or SharePoint sites or the wikis and look for it. Have it available right there. Right? That could save so much frustration, so many calls, and so much rework. Right? And so how would you do that? You need to think about it. You have help, process, they're in the application, there's some sort of home space where you can get to an application or to the documentation about the application or to the process. Maybe you want to look at a process map or to the requirements themselves. And don't forget that last little bullet, that is the technical term for that, the funny term that I like, is breadcrumbs. right? Remember when people are navigating all around this that they need to be able to get back to where they were. And I'm sure you've experienced times where you were able to get back and it was comforting, and times when you couldn't get back to where you were without starting all the way over and abandoning things, coming back in, closing a browser, something of that nature, and then starting over. I'm sure you've experienced frustration, and so let's not proliferate that, right? All this has to be done with intent to save time, right? The only reason to do any documentation at all is to save time or for government compliance. But from a project perspective, it's to save time. Here's a little advice on naming conventions. I think you could find lots of write-ups everywhere on this. I didn't go to a great level of detail. Everything needs to be unique so you can find it. It needs to be standard so you can find it, right? It needs to be easy. It needs to be short. And so any 2 of those would be easy to do. Any 3 is challenging. Any 4 is really hard, but it's worth it to go through the process so that things are as simple as can possibly be, but no simpler, as obvious as they can be, as easy to get to, as intuitive as they can be, so people use them, right? So how do you store documents, right? So obviously in one place, if you possibly can. If you can't, then you should have some sort of an index, like a table of contents, that is easy to click out to any document, even if it's stored in a different tool set. Like a lot of my customers have various, document them in SharePoint and all kinds of different things, and you can't put them all in one place, but you can put an index, right? And to keep those things up to date, that's why we have interns and temps, right? Because it's relatively simple to fix broken links. What high-level professional has time to do that? That's a perfect way for people to learn the document hierarchy, is fixing stuff like that and keeping it up to date. Which brings me to a point that I'm not sure is in here, is that every document should have an owner, and it should be part of their job description to keep up the documents that are under their jurisdiction. Right? That's how documents get stale, when no one person owns them. Nobody's being reviewed on how up-to-date documents are, so they get more and more and more out of date to the point no one trusts them, and they lose most of their value. They're very valuable if they're updated. They're not very valuable if they're not updated. Hence, you need to keep them updated, right? Okay, so a little tactic that allows you to send a static link, and let's say you have a folder structure. You have a folder at the top, or the root, it used to be called, right? And then you have other folders underneath that. Try to make it broad and not deep, right? So broad is like, maybe you have a folder called status. Maybe you have a folder called requirements. Maybe you have a folder called tests. Things like that. Whatever you need, right? Inside those folders, you would have every version of the documents that pertain to that topic. In the top folder, we usually recommend people put a read-only version of every major document that people access on a frequent basis. Read-only, like a PDF or whatever, or an HTML, that's not easily changed, right? I'm not talking about protecting it from hackers. I'm talking about protecting it from accidental updating by somebody who's just too lazy to go find the right document. So that you can send, pardon me, a link, for instance, to a status report, and anytime anybody clicks that for the life of the project, they will get the most recent issued status report. So you don't ever have to send them another link. Once they have the link for the status, they always have the link for the status. And you can embed it in documents, you can put it in emails, you can put it in index lists, and you don't have to maintain it, because you know through your process that it's always going to reflect the most current baseline version of your document. So a couple things here as a review to reduce the number of documents. For one thing, don't create a new document. Put the new information you have where it could already live, right? You can get rid of agenda and meeting minutes. Think of all the meetings that you have and take that times 2, and that's how many documents you can reduce by just using these techniques, right? Plus, you'll get more productivity. Here's the WIDIACO slide, right? I'll give you a moment to look at that. Create a place for everything, put everything in its place, and you can remove dozens or hundreds of documents from a project. Hundreds of documents do not have to be created, managed, dealt with, searched, stored, archived, everything. You can reduce the volume of your documentation sometimes by 25 to 50%. 25 to 50% of the volume of your document, of your words that you have to deal with on a project. It's really worth the effort, right? So we've got SharePoint or something else like that, right? Some sort of collaborative environment. Take a look there. You know, it keeps track of versions. There's all kinds of reasons to do that, so people can find it, right? Everything in one place. And let it do some of the work for you, right? Even now, the SharePoint search works. It didn't used to work or squat. Then it was really slow and incredibly painful. Now it works fine. It's a little slow, but it works fine, right? So SharePoint, some other tool, Google search is lightning fast, right? There's other tools. Any tool, wikis are pretty fast. It doesn't matter what the tool is. It matters how you use it, right? Traceability, you know, just a quick word. Whenever you have a unique list of things, like requirements, action items, issues, defects, whatever, they should all carry a unique identifier so that you can search for that unique identifier and do poor man's impact analysis. You'll find everything in that document hierarchy that mentions that particular unique identifier. It's pretty easy to do. You don't have to even make any hyperlinks. Now that desktop search and SharePoint search works reasonably well, things are good from that perspective. Okay, so here, I can't see you, but just raise your hands, those of you that like these detailed status reports we have to create, right? That's nobody. Nobody likes to spend their time creating status reports. So if you set up your process to be self-statusing, a tiny bit of data entry can do that work for you, right? So let's talk about this in the context of documents, and you can extrapolate this across the width and breadth of all the deliverables on all your projects, right? You have a document, and you define the state, like those subsidiary bullet points, started, draft 1, 2, signed off, whatever you want to do in there that describes the process that's demonstrable, right? Put it in your schedule, and then as those things are done, they'll automatically roll up. Everybody knows where it is. Everybody knows whose desk it's on. You don't have to talk. You don't have to write, right? You want to construct this so that a tiny bit of updating gives you the data you need, the status. That's what we mean by self-statusing. You don't have to hold a meeting to see where you are in your document. Everything's right out there. The owners of each step are laid out. Everybody can see at a glance who's on first. And by migrated to a specific location, if you have a configuration management system, you can check for the existence of a document. If it's in there, it's done. Right? We like to treat our documents as having states of dev, QA, and prod, just like code. And you don't have to be running a software project to have this, right? If it's just in the SharePoint area that's a working document that's in dev, once it's sent for review, it's in a certain place where everybody knows to review it. Once it's in production, that means it's been baseline, right? These are just analogous terms, not necessarily different environments. And you know that, and then you don't have to status it. Everybody can see it, right? Okay, brief on Glossary. We could do a whole webinar just on glossaries, which I think are one of the most underutilized productivity tools. Pardon me, because people don't know what other people mean when they say words. Right? So here's the best practice. And this is how I run my projects and how my project managers run their projects when they can, right, when it fits the culture. All documents can only have words that are in the glossary. Let me put that another way. Documents can consist of words, each of which is defined in the glossary. You should not use a word that's not defined. People don't know what it means. Right? It's too easy to misconstrue it. This means you need a glossary. And you could have a hierarchy, and some of these could be virtual, right? A virtual join of documents, which is very easy to do with master documents and all kinds of things, right? Your project probably needs a glossary. The product or the area you're working in, of which your project is a small part, probably needs a glossary. That might or might not be the same thing as a department or a business unit. And the entire organization needs to be the summary of all those, right? That's why I called it virtual. And we'll talk about that again another day, or if you want more information. We just don't have time to get into all these. But please contact me, and I'll be happy to work with you on that. Right? So, in review, we did a little introduction. Benefits. Why would you want to do this? Well, because you can't find things. There's too many documents. There's too much overlap. You don't know what's updated. You're in the middle of the version wars. It's too thick. It's too hard. It takes too much time. Right? That pretty much covers it. Right? Writing requirements. Certain things you want to do. Right? 6th grade level for requirements. You have tools at your disposal to do that. There's free web tools, and it's embedded in Word. It's in every major word processor, the Flesch Kincaid Index. You want to keep it simple. Right? Only use words defined in the glossary. Very simple concept. It's going to take a while to implement that. Probably need some change management to go along with that. Maybe even some training. Communicating technical concepts. What do you want people to know? How do you want them to know it? Always make it in writing that you can update as you go. Right? We didn't really talk about this except in context of the document circle, about when you have an effort, you have different kinds of information about it. You have maybe training materials, you have lists of things like lists of errors or problems or processes. You have a workflow that people work with in terms of the processes that they use. There may be some requirements associated with an effort. You may have models that represent the as-is and the to-be. The to-be hopefully will migrate to the as-is as projects complete. And you want people to be able to get to all that from anywhere they are. No matter where they start, no matter what context they're coming from, you want them to have relatively seamless and simple access to all the information that they have plans for. Right? That's what the document circle is about. And then we talked briefly about document management. The most important thing about document management is that all your stuff lives in one easy-to-use place. And after that, that everything is named accordingly, right? That you have some naming convention that a normal human being can glean meaning from. Other document management techniques is don't create any new ones, which means you have to create all the needed documents at the beginning of a project. Have some discipline, lead by example, pop those babies open every time a topic comes up that needs recording and record it right in place. You're going to be the one that leads this effort. You're going to lead the charge to higher productivity. This does work. It's very easy. It's just different, right? Some people I've seen get upset when you just mention that you might not need meeting minutes anymore, right? One brief story, one project that my team took over, one of the things we do is take over failing projects, and then we either recommend to close the project in an orderly fashion or we bring it back from its non-performing state. There's various things we do. We always create a glossary because the root of most project problems is communication, right? And then we almost always find a disorganized set of documents in a failing project or a troubled project or a non-performing project. Everybody's writing everything down in many places. It's overlapping. Nobody knows where it is. Documents don't have owners. One project, we took the document count from 1,500 to just over 150. We reduced the actual document count from 1,500 plus documents to just over 150. And the information was better, and it was shorter, and it was consumable, right? Because people just aren't thinking. They just jump in and they start doing things and they write and they're in a hurry, and it's very difficult to make head or tails out of it, right? So I just wanted to leave you with that story that it is possible to still pass audits and be in compliance. We've done it dozens of times with fewer documents and yet have greater understanding and communication. Right? We'd love to help you with that. There's information here. Now we have time for questions. Let's again, my name is Daryl Rayner, Data Analysis and Results. The contact information is there, and if you need to, just shoot something to James at this address, or we will be able to get you my ID in another manner. Please just ask any questions you have now. We'll use the rest of the time for your questions. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this webinar. I hope that we've been some help to you.
Well, thanks, Daryl. Boy, this has been helpful. I know that each time I've sat in on it, I make a couple of notes of changes I need to make. Well, I would encourage you, as Daryl has, to go ahead and submit your questions if you've not done so already. Just click on the Questions tab and type in your question. We've got about 5 minutes remaining, so we'll see if we can get to as many of these as possible. And if we don't get to your question online, then go ahead and continue to submit it, and we'll see if we can get your response after the webinar ends. Daryl, I'm going to ask the first question because this is one that I personally am struggling with. You know, and I'm sure that many of our listeners are in the same situation. You know, you've been in a company for a number of years, and there aren't great processes for documentation. You know, you got sales and marketing have information buried somewhere, and you've got your development team have information somewhere, and you've got your executive team that has information somewhere. What's the best way to put a process into place to be able to, I mean, some folks have suggested, you know, designating someone as a librarian. Others say, you know, we're just going to have a sit down and we're going to spend half a day documenting everything. But what would be a good suggestion for the first steps towards being able to find good information in a timely fashion?
Right. Okay. So let me just jot down a note so I don't forget. I have 3 suggestions, and we'll probably be able to take that on more. And that's a very common question. I get this all the time, right? Group effort, assign somebody as a librarian, you know, all those are good. They all can work. And it's probably a blend in any particular situation, right? I'm just going to say one word and then let your imagination run wild. Intern, right? Temp. One of the other ways that you might consider this, and I have helped clients do this in the past. It's obviously confidential, but I can talk about the process, right? There are imaging firms, right? I have a couple as clients. Here's part of the process. Here's what they do. They scan in a document, and then they send that scan along with some keywords to an outsourced vendor, India, someplace else, and then those vendors index those documents. Indexing is basically assigning keywords to them by the content of the document and using a list of keywords that they want to embed in these documents, right? And so you can do the same thing with your electronic documents. It's very cost effective to outsource. If you have 1,000 documents, let's say, that's a tiny bit, by the way. Some of my clients have millions of documents because they haven't followed these processes. They've got millions of documents. You can't do anything with 1,000,000 documents. You could do something with 1,000. You could outsource it to these firms the same way you do when you scan documents in and you have them indexed. You have them read through, paw through the document, do searches, heuristically, not just text, but more in the Google fashion, about what people mean, and then assign keywords to them. So that at least when you're running a desktop search, your keywords would click in. So like for Journix, you might have documents that pertain to timesheet and or project execute, right? So the tags for any given document might include the list of products to which they refer. So some documents would only refer to timesheet, some would only refer to project execute, some would refer to both, right? Or some would refer to neither. Maybe some other product or no product. But that is a relatively easy distinction to make if someone is looking at that document, right? Another one is to go on a bit of a jihad to consolidate documents, right? One way that we sometimes do that, and we've done this many times at clients, and it drives everybody crazy, and it's the right thing to do, is know which documents are being accessed. Those that aren't being accessed, set some arbitrary period of time, like a month, a year, 3 years, whatever it is. If they've never been accessed, except by something that's indexing them, then you move them off to archive, right? Some of my clients have documents that are live that were created in 1985, and they have not been updated since 1985. That's insane if it's not a compliance type situation, which it's not, right? You don't need a document that's 26 years old. Who has time to paw through 26 years worth of documents to find something? You can't even, the search terms are different. You don't even know what's in there to find it. It's almost useless, right? And so you can't think of, could there ever be any use for a document before you archive it? You have to think, is anybody really going to need this? Are we going to make more money if we have it, or are we going to be in more trouble if we don't have it? It can't just be somebody might want it someday. There's too many documents. Get rid of them, right? And then go about the business of constricting the creation of new documents to only what's needed, right? So I hope I answered that a little bit. A librarian's good, a group effort's good, but it's all going to fall apart again unless you put some of these new processes in place.
Well, that is good information. One of our listeners chimed in and said, "How long should you keep something?" And I think you just answered it. You really, it's not a matter of time; it's a matter of importance. And that's the decision process that needs to go into place, right?
Absolutely, and don't confuse official legal retention periods with the useful life of a document, right? Obviously, you have to keep things like tax records for 7 years, whatever. There's certain rules on certain documents. That does not mean they have to be in a repository that's searchable, that comes up and clutters up search results, right? You can archive them off someplace else that people don't normally paw through and still be legally fine, but get them out of the repository that people look in and search for. And James, I do detect a little bit of guilt in your voice.
Guilt. Oh well, yeah, I'm guilty as charged. I tell you what, that you mentioned that one word, intern, and that what that brought into my mind was kind of a neutral third party, somebody who could take ownership of that isn't vested in one part of the company, that everybody could contribute and let that person kind of be the central cog in the wheel. I'm going to have to play on that one, Daryl. You got me thinking. I think we've got time for one more question. We're running a little short of time here, but I'm going to try to squeeze this one in because several people have asked this question, Daryl. And I'm going to just, well, I won't use a name because there's several people. It says we've tried several types of central document management systems like Wiki, SharePoint, etc. And no one, the problem is that no one keeps using them. They just kind of fade away in the distance. How do you recommend we start and keep on using a system long term to get the benefit that you're talking about?
Right. So very briefly, let me put this in a bit of a joke, but not really. So there was a Russian czar, and the person behind the throne with all the power, kind of like one of the commissars, right, said, you can't just punish the people that create the forms. You have to kill them. right? So that's sort of funny. You don't kill people in businesses and government organizations that create forms, but you can punish them, and you can lead by example and set the processes. If you want something to stick from a process perspective, and this is Change Management 101, doesn't have anything to do with the type of process, but it's needed here, make it the norm, make it mandatory, right? Have somebody on every project and say, you are in charge of getting everybody to use this thing. Make it useful, cut off all other efforts to do anything else but use it. And the type of tool really doesn't matter, right? It's not the tool, it's somebody who doesn't want to get in there. And a tool can be so cumbersome as so people don't even want to do it, right? But aside from that, it's adoption, asking people to do it, telling people to do it, making it part of their job description. You know, if they're bonus employees, making their bonus dependent on it, right? Making it part of the process. Executives do reviews, and they will review things that are only in this place. They will not look at anything that's not in the repository. There's various ways to cement this in, and we can work with people and set up a custom plan for you to do it. It's worth the hassle. It is a change, so it's not something you just kind of float around. It is something that an organization must mandate because everybody has an opinion on how documents should be dealt with. And if there's not like the one true way, you'll have everybody doing it their way. So take it from there.
Great information. Thank you, Daryl. Well, we've come to the end of our time. I know Daryl's got commitments. I know you have commitments, and so we're going to go ahead and let you guys drop off today. But just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We appreciate your attendance, and I would encourage you to contact Daryl if you have any questions or if you've got areas in managing and setting up PMOs and managing documents. Daryl is a process person that can really help your organization, so I would encourage you to contact him. If you need information on what Journix does, so you know we help with a solution called Journix Project Execute that helps you to figure out who's working on what, who's available for the next project, when will they be finished. So it's a resource management solution built in with project planning and scheduling. And if you need help in that area, contact us. We'll be happy to help you. I also would encourage you to visit our website at projectexecute.com. It was up on the website earlier. We've got several other webinars just like this one that are offered by professionals like Daryl who have many years of experience. We offer free PDUs, and more so than that, excellent background like we've received today from Daryl. Great suggestions, things that you can put into practice today into your project management processes. We want to help you be successful, and these webinars are a part of that. So I hope this has been helpful for you. We want to thank you again for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. We hope that all your projects will be successful. Have a wonderful day.